A simple lock change unleashes a shocking truth. In Karen's mind, a black man changing locks and securing his home could only mean one thing: criminal activity. Fueled by paranoia, she called the cops, convinced she was exposing a threat. But Karen had no idea that she was the real trespasser, and that the man she targeted had already uncovered her darkest secret. When the police arrived, it wasn't him they were after, it was her. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from today. Let's begin the story. The neighborhood had always been quiet, a picturesque suburb where nothing ever seemed to happen. But for Karen, that order was being disrupted. From the moment the black homeowner moved into the house across the street, something inside her shifted. She had watched with sharp, prying eyes as the moving trucks arrived, each box carried inside fueling the fire of her suspicion. It wasn't just curiosity, it was an unshakable belief that he didn't belong there. In her mind, there was simply no way a black man could afford a home in this neighborhood without being involved in something shady. She had no evidence, but she didn't need any. The conviction settled deep within her, growing into something far more dangerous than mere gossip. At first, she observed from behind her curtains, peering through the gap just wide enough to see without being seen. She memorized his schedule, noting when he left, when he returned, and whether anyone visited. He kept to himself, went to work like clockwork, and maintained his home with care. Details that should have reassured her, but instead they made her more suspicious. The more she watched, the more she convinced herself that something had to be wrong. The way he came and went with such ease, never drawing attention to himself, almost too quiet. Was he trying to avoid being noticed? Was he hiding something? These questions tormented her, whispering their poisonous logic until they became an obsession. One evening, as she sat in her dimly lit living room, scrolling through crime reports and convincing herself that a criminal mastermind was living just feet away, she stumbled upon an idea that sent a thrill through her veins. She needed to see inside his house. If she could find something, anything, that would confirm her suspicions, she could finally alert the authorities. And just like that, her mission began. Karen didn't know how she had gotten the key, but she had it. Maybe she had swiped it unnoticed when he left it on his porch one morning. Or maybe she had taken it during one of those brief moments when he spoke to a neighbor and stepped away. It didn't matter. What mattered was that she now held the power to know the truth. The first time she slipped into his house, she told herself it would be quick, a simple look around, nothing more. Her pulse pounded as she turned the key, feeling an odd mix of fear and excitement as the lock clicked open. The air inside was still, carrying the faint scent of fresh linen and polished wood. It was unsettling how ordinary everything looked. No signs of illegal dealings, no suspicious stacks of cash or hidden weapons. Just a well-maintained living space. A couch with a neatly folded throw blanket, a bookshelf filled with well-worn titles, a kitchen counter with an unopened stack of mail. She hesitated, feeling a twinge of doubt, but then pushed forward. If she searched long enough, she would find something. She rifled through the mail, flipping through bills and bank statements, scanning for anything unusual. When she found nothing, she moved to the drawers, opening and closing them with a calculated efficiency, snapping quick photos of anything that caught her eye. She wasn't sure how long she had been inside when she finally tore herself away, ensuring everything was placed back exactly as she had found it. Locking the door behind her, she rushed back to her own house, breathless with both exhilaration and frustration. There had been nothing. Yet, but she wasn't giving up. That break-in was just the beginning. At first, the black homeowner didn't notice anything. Life continued as normal, work, errands, the occasional weekend spent relaxing on the back patio. But as the days passed, a nagging unease began to creep in. It started with small things. A drawer left slightly ajar when he was sure he had closed it, a pile of papers on his desk subtly rearranged, his keys placed in a different spot than usual. Little things, things that could easily be explained away. Maybe he had been distracted, maybe he was imagining it, but the feeling wouldn't leave. Then, one evening, as he sifted through his mail, his fingers paused over a stack of envelopes. He had developed a habit of stacking them a certain way, a system of organization only he knew. Yet now, something was off. Some of the envelopes had been shuffled, their alignment just slightly different than how he had left them the night before. A shiver crawled down his spine. Someone had been inside his house. He sat in silence for a long moment, forcing himself to think rationally. There was no sign of forced entry, No missing items, but the small, subtle disturbances gnawed at him. Whoever it was, they weren't here to steal, they were searching. And that realization was far more unsettling than the idea of a random break-in. The next morning, he took action. He wasn't about to accuse anyone without proof, but if his gut was right, whoever was entering his home would be back. So, he installed a camera. A small, discreet device angled toward the front door. Not obvious enough to be noticed by someone who wasn't looking for it, but positioned well enough to capture anyone attempting to enter. With everything set, he resumed his daily routine, leaving for work as usual. Only this time, he had something waiting for him when he got home. The footage didn't lie. The moment he pressed play, there she was, Karen. The woman who had always given him odd looks, the one who never seemed to speak but always seemed to watch. There was no hesitation in her movements. She walked right up to his door, reached into her pocket and pulled out his key. With a swift motion, she turned the lock and stepped inside, as if she owned the place. His blood boiled. It wasn't just about the invasion of privacy. It was about the audacity, the entitlement. She had been doing this for who knows how long, violating his space over and over again. But more than anger, there was something else growing inside him. A sense of certainty. She had no idea that this was the last time she would ever do this. He would make sure of it. The black homeowner didn't react immediately. Instead, he sat back, the cold weight of realization settling in his gut. Karen had been inside his house more than once. That much was clear. But how long had this been going on? And what exactly had she been looking for? He needed to make sure she never did it again. The next morning, he visited the hardware store and picked up a new lock, one that no copied key could open. He installed it before he left for work, his hand steady despite the slow burn of anger deep in his chest. The thought of Karen returning to find herself locked out, confused, maybe even enraged, brought a quiet sense of satisfaction. He wasn't done yet. That evening, he reviewed the footage again, memorizing every detail, her casual stroll up to his door, the way she confidently unlocked it, the entitled sweep of her gaze as she stepped inside. She had done this before, probably convinced that he would never notice. But now, she was the one being watched. The anticipation of her reaction kept him awake that night. The next day, Karen awoke to a morning like any other, but the moment she approached the black homeowner's door, something felt off. She reached into her pocket, her fingers closing around the key that had granted her silent access for weeks. Slipping it into the lock, she turned it with ease until it stopped. A frown creased her forehead. She tried again, jiggling it slightly. Nothing. Her stomach dropped. He changed the locks. Panic twisted inside her, but it was quickly replaced by a hot surge of anger. How dare he? What was he hiding? This only confirmed what she had believed all along. He was involved in something criminal. Why else would he suddenly change the locks without warning? Karen stormed back to her house, heart pounding, her mind racing with ways to expose him. The more she thought about it, the more enraged she became. She wouldn't let this go. No, she would make sure the authorities knew what was happening. She picked up her phone, dialing with shaking hands. 911. What's your emergency? Yes, she snapped, her voice laced with self-righteous fury. There's a suspicious man trying to break into a house on my street. I think he's up to something dangerous. She smirked, picturing the officers arriving, demanding answers, dragging him out in handcuffs. But what she didn't know was that she had just set herself up for something far worse. The sirens cut through the neighborhood's usual quiet. Within moments, a squad car pulled up in front of the black homeowner's house, its flashing lights reflecting off the freshly painted exterior. Karen stood on her porch, arms crossed, watching triumphantly as the officers stepped out, their expressions sharp and professional. There, she pointed. He was tampering with the locks, probably trying to break in. One of the officers turned toward the black homeowner, who stood calmly on his porch, arms crossed over his chest. Unlike Karen, he wasn't flustered or frantic. He was waiting. Sir, do you live here? The officer asked. Yes, the homeowner said, his voice steady. And I have proof. Without hesitation, he pulled out his ID and an envelope with his name and address printed on it. The officers examined both before exchanging a glance. Karen's smirk faltered. You don't understand, she protested, stepping forward. He changed the locks without telling anyone. That's suspicious. The officer raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, changing the locks on your own home is not a crime. Karen's face reddened. "But I also have security footage," the homeowner interjected smoothly. "Would you like to see who's actually been breaking into my house?" Karen went pale. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The officers turned to her, their expressions shifting from neutral to something sharper. Suspicious. The homeowner pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and turned it toward them. The footage played in silence, the grainy black and white image showing Karen unlocking his door with practiced ease and stepping inside. The moment the officers saw it, their posture stiffened. One of them looked back at Karen. "Ma'am, can you explain this?" Karen took a shaky step back, her mind scrambling for an excuse, an explanation, anything. But the homeowner wasn't done. "You might also want to check her record," he added. "I did some research. Turns out she's on probation for theft and trespassing." The second officer reached for their radio. "Dispatch, run a check on a Karen Mitchell." The radio crackled, and within seconds, the confirmation came through. Karen Mitchell. Prior charges for burglary. Currently on probation. Silence. Thick, suffocating silence. Then, the first officer sighed, stepping toward Karen. "Ma'am, turn around." Her eyes widened. "Wait, no. He's the criminal. He set me up. Ma'am, you're under arrest for probation violation and breaking into this man's home." The cuffs clicked around her wrists. She shrieked, struggling as they led her toward the squad car, screaming about injustice, about being framed. But no one was listening anymore. The black homeowner stood still, watching as Karen was placed into the back seat of the police car. The weight that had been pressing on his shoulders for weeks finally lifted. Justice had been served. The days after Karen's arrest were different. The neighborhood, once tense with her watchful eyes and whispered accusations, felt lighter. The black homeowner no longer felt the invisible pressure of being scrutinized at every turn. He could leave his house without the weight of suspicion pressing against him. The footage spread among the neighbors. People who had once nodded politely but kept their distance now offered quiet apologies, their expressions tinged with guilt. The realization that they had let Karen's paranoia shape their view of him was sobering. He didn't need their apologies, though. He only needed his peace. And now, finally, he had it. This story is a powerful reminder of the dangers of prejudice, entitlement, and the assumptions people make based on their own biases. How often do we see situations where the innocent are targeted simply because they don't fit someone's narrow expectations? And how often do we let paranoia and discrimination go unchecked? Let's continue this conversation in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps bring more stories like this to life. Thanks for watching.